What was your, oh, this person is a psychopath moment when meeting someone? Quick trigger warning before we jump into this one. Some of these stories are rather disturbing, with violent behavior being depicted by not only adults, but youth as well, including stalking, animal violence, and physical as well as emotional abuse. Viewer discretion is advised for this one. I've been a public school teacher for a decade. I've only ever been scared of one student. First of all, this was in my first few years of teaching. This student was a myth in my school. I taught at an alternative school for students that had been expelled from every other school, but overall my students were pretty chill. They weren't good students, but if you met them at their level, things were usually fine. The exception was this kid. Let's call him JT. JT was a sophomore when I met him. At that point, I didn't teach him, but boy did I hear about him. Somehow, his mom was able to game the paperwork and education system enough that this kid was unpunishable. Everything was technically covered under a litany of 504 plans and IEP paperwork. So much so that this kid literally pushed an 8-month pregnant teacher down, and he was back 2 weeks later. He could literally punch a kid in the mouth and be back 2 days later. And because of this, he was just a massive problem. The first terrifying discovery for me was that his mom was very vocal about not wanting him home because she was scared of him. She had a good reason to be. JT, as a small child, tried to get rid of his family by lighting their house on fire, specifically trying to get rid of his brother by duct taping him to the bed while he slept. His brother survived, but had horrific burns. I finally had the pleasure of teaching JT in his senior year. He had approximately 10 credits, all gym-based, and was nowhere near graduation. My first note was that this is the only kid I've ever met that just had nothing going on behind his eyes. He was shark-like. He never smiled or laughed unless someone got hurt. Just cruel for cruelty's sake. One day, JT wasn't there, which frankly was odd. He had a great drug business going at school, and he only had to avoid one cop. The next day, we found out why he wasn't there. JT murdered a kid, shot him in the face for $12 and a little bit of weed. His lawyer tried to get his sentence lowered by arguing that it was technically his first offense, since everything else happened when he was a kid. He got 25 to life. I'm a kindergarten teacher, and have been for years. I had one kid like that, nothing behind his eyes, truly took pleasure in seeing people hurt. He was like a cancer in the classroom. He loved nothing more than to create scenarios in which he could witness other kids having their feelings hurt. Several times a week, he'd have a student crying in hysterics. He loved getting children to turn on each other. He'd lie to one kid about something another kid supposedly did, and he loved to see the kids left out and feel sad and alone. It's like he literally fed off their anxiety. His parents were also super bizarre. They adopted like 6 kids of various genders and races, but all the kids were the same age. Then the mom would make reference to them being twins when they very obviously were not. I told my teacher partner that if I had to guess one child in my history of teaching that would end up on TV for a violent crime, it would definitely be this child. I should also mention that at our class Christmas party, he threw a full cup of scalding hot cocoa at my teaching partner's chest. It splattered and burned the surrounding children and gave my teaching partner a very bad burn. When I asked him what he was thinking, he said, "I was done with it." I hope he doesn't end up murdering someone someday, but I could definitely see it happening. No emotion, no empathy, no conscience. It was an Uber driver. My wife and I took an Uber down to the bars one weekend. Once he picked us up, I could easily tell that he was on something. While we were crossing a bridge on the interstate, about halfway to our destination, he says, "Isn't it crazy that I could swerve off the road and unalive all of us right now?" I told him to get off on the next exit and canceled the ride. I also reported him to Uber, so hopefully nobody has to get in a car with that lunatic ever again. Was walking my dog down a main road on his leash, and a lady was walking her dog without one. Her dog stopped in the road, causing cars to have to halt for them. She had no control of it. Her dog then lunged for my dog. I asked her to put her dog on a leash, and she said that she would stomp on my dog's head and let her dog finish mine off. I knew it wasn't even worth arguing with crazy, so I carried on my walk. She then set her house on fire 2 weeks later with her children inside. Luckily they were okay, but yeah, madness. Thankfully, she's currently in prison. She was actually released right after the arson, and then rearrested for further crimes. Her children are now 4 and 7, and the dog is also okay. A kid I went to primary school with invited me to his house after school one day. Not many people talked to him because it was a private school, and he was only a student there because his dad was a groundskeeper. I didn't want to go, but I didn't want to be a dick like everyone else, so I said yes, but that I couldn't stay long. When we were there, we went behind his house, and there were several bare spots in the grass, some of them with a single stick sticking up in the middle while others had a thin plastic tube poking out. He was very excited, and started digging up one of the spots with a hose poking out. He pulled up a jar with a dead baby bird in it. The hose was poked through a hole in the lid to let air in. He went on to tell me that he likes to bury things alive. Sometimes he seals the jar tight, and sometimes gives an air hose, and then even puts a little food and water in to keep them alive longer. He said you can't bury them too deep, or you can't hear them trying to escape. Occasionally, he would pour water down the tubes to drown the animals. I was around 8 to 10 at the time. I'm 52 now, and it still makes me sick to just think about that.
Jesus, I'm not even sure Stephen King could have thought up that kind of shit.
After moving to a new city a few years ago, my best friend came to visit. We were out at a bar when a guy asked to sit with us because there weren't any free tables outside. Fine, being polite. We started talking to the guy, and he told us that he was a truck driver just stopping overnight in town, and that at some point mentioned he was ex-military. From there, things began to get strange. Not only was he in the military, but he had a brother who was in the CIA, embedded in Russia. My friend and I also gradually got the sense that this guy was a little too interested in us. We eventually closed our tabs and decided to go to a different bar, but the guy stuck with us, telling us increasingly tall tales about his time in the military. He eventually confessed that there was no brother. He was the spy who'd been embedded in Russia. What struck me was how, even though his stories got more and more ridiculous, his demeanor was deadly serious, if a bit overwrought, and the intensity was starting to make my skin crawl. Not only that, but he was starting to pick fights with other people at the bar, deliberately being belligerent. Over time, he started to radiate this menacing air that hadn't been apparent when we first started talking to him. He didn't get angry directly at us, but it was like he was demonstrating how scary he could be and suggesting we stay on his good side. Finally, he took me aside and slipped into a pretty unconvincing Russian accent. Alas, he was never a spy for the US. He was a double agent, a one-man Russian sleeper cell, but he couldn't bear lying to me, so he had to come clean. Even though we had open tabs at the bar, my friend and I waited until the guy went to the bathroom, abandoned our cards, and dipped, post-haste. This was basically my dad. All sorts of crazy stories about being in the CIA or Vietnam or the secret NSA telepathic group called the Blue Lab or millions of other things. Finally got his actual service records years later, and he was a janitor in Germany for 6 months before being dishonorably discharged for being too crazy for the army. I was friends with this one couple. The wife made up an affair with me to hurt the husband's feelings. The husband showed up in my condo with a gun and was detained by security guards and later the police. I had no idea about any of it until later when the condo security contacted me. Damn, that's some good condo security. What kind of swanky-ass place is this guy living in? Was chatting with a guy in a pub. Seemed like a normal, nice dude. Got on really well. At some point in the conversation, he casually mentions that he's not long out of jail for what he did to a guy, basically alluding to torture. He slipped it into the conversation so casually, as if he was telling me about running to the store for some milk. I never saw it coming. I asked around a bit over the days after that, and confirmed that he was not full of shit. When my ex's dad told the story of the time that he put a wet towel on top of an anthill, and then threw the towel at my ex, the wet towel stuck to her skin and she was immediately covered with ants, who bit her all over her body. He was laughing when he told the story, like it was the funniest prank ever. My ex told him that it actually hurt a lot and traumatized her quite a bit, and he just said, "Well, I'm okay because I already asked God for forgiveness."
Maybe you should have asked your fucking daughter. What a piece of shite.
I hope she gets to choose the eventual nursing home. A woman I used to work with saw a group of boys swinging a kitten around by its head. So she grabbed the cat from them and went home with it, checked it for a microchip, put up flyers, etc. But this kitten was so tiny and new that no one came forward. So my parents adopted him. He's 17 now. In my hometown, there was a story of a girl and her ex-boyfriend that was a major headline in the city for months. She was 17 and had broken up with her abusive and mentally ill 20-year-old boyfriend, and he began to stalk her and camp outside her house. One day, he decided to climb up the house and into her bedroom window, stabbed her multiple times in the head, set fire to her family home, and attempted to unalive himself by jumping out the second-story bedroom window. By some miracle, she survived without any life-changing injuries. Her family's house didn't burn down like he intended, and he's been put away for a very long time. Last I heard, she's now happily married with a baby. So that's it for today, guys. Don't feel you need to leave your stories in the comments below, because I don't want people sharing things that they feel pressured to share when they don't want to share them. But if you do want to share them, go right ahead. No rapid fire for this one, thank goodness, because I really don't want to read any more of these. They are just horrible. I tried to sprinkle in as much of the positive endings as I could towards the end, but not a lot of them ended off on a good note. Though with that said, I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope you aren't one of my listeners who falls asleep to my videos, because I cannot imagine what kind of horrible nightmares you would have. I'm ReddList. I hope you have a good rest of your day, stay safe, take care of yourselves, and I will see you next time.